All right, everybody, we're going to get started here in a few minutes. Just hanging out for a couple more minutes before we get started. Just hang tight. Just about to get going here. Just getting a few things set up on my end. All right, everybody, welcome to the webinar, which is the 3 little-known habits that are ruining your business. My name is Brock Shinen. I wanted to go over a few housekeeping things just to help you get ready for the webinar. But first, just want to let you know that I am using a new webinar platform. So there may be instances where I'm kind of fiddling around and looking for things to try and get set up, and I apologize for that. I'm going to try and deliver a lot of value today. So I really just want you to focus in on the value, some of the technical aspects. You know, I may have a glitch here or there, and I'll just try and work through it. One of the things I'm going to be I'm not going to switch screens too much and share slides. I do have a couple of slides ready to go for you guys. I'm going to try and not switch too much back and forth between me and the slides just to keep things smooth for this webinar. But I will tell you, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a chat box. And use that chat box if you're getting into situations where there's audio or video problems. The first thing I recommend is that you simply refresh your browser. A lot of times refreshing your browser will take care of any audio or video issues that you have. The other thing is I'm going to switch real quick to one of the slides. And basically just kind of going back and forth, there may be a slight delay between when I'm talking and the slide that you see. So what I want to do is just make sure that I take a little bit of time to make sure that you see the slide when I'm talking about it. So I might leave a slide up for a little bit longer, or it may pop up on the screen before you hear me talking about it. And that's just normal with Google Hangouts. We're doing this. This particular webinar platform is utilizing the Google Hangouts framework. And so part of the inherent problem in that system is that there's sometimes a delay. So we're just going to work through it. But as far as housekeeping goes, you see on your screen now we're talking about if you do have audio or video problems, start by refreshing the window, refreshing your browser. Actually, start with the individual tab, and if that doesn't work, then try and refresh your entire browser. If you're still having problems, get back on and just try and chat. Now, one of the things with chat, let me switch back here. One of the things with chat is that as I'm talking, so I'm getting my screen open here, as I'm talking, I may not be able to stop and answer questions as they're going because I'm trying to look at the camera. I'm trying to focus on delivering for you. So if you have questions and they're sort of backing up, there is going to be a Q&A section, a Q&A part towards the end of the webinar. So we're going to get into, and I'll try and answer any questions you have, whatever those are. We'll try and get to those. So just go ahead and drop them in the chat box. Let me know that you see the chat box and everything, the audio and video quality is working well. Just give me a yes in the chat box if that's working for you. Good. I see a few popping up. Great. Good, good. Okay, so it looks like so far everybody is receiving a solid audio. Yep, good. Okay, so perfect. So we're just going to go ahead and proceed through the webinar. And again, any audio or video, refresh your tab, refresh your browser. Any questions, use the chat box. I may not respond as I'm talking. I may not even see the chat come in. But towards the end of the webinar, I'll try and scroll through those and try and knock out those questions. And if I miss one, feel free to ask it again. That's not a problem at all. The other thing is, I really value your time. One of my areas of value is that people's time is meaningful. It's meaningful to them. It's meaningful to me. And I don't ever want to waste it. I don't ever want to take it for granted. So one of the things I'm going to do is give you an incentive to stick around excuse me, through the whole webinar. And I'm going to give you a free action guide that's going to guide you through. It's going to give you some great tools. I'm not going to give you all the details, but I do have this action guide. It's like an ebook format, and I put that together just for you so that you can, if you stick through the substance of the webinar, that's kind of your incentive to stick around. And there's going to be a ton of value along the way. But again, for those of you who, I realize schedules are always kind of influencing how we spend our time, and some people only have a very limited window of time, and I get that. I'm the same way. But as an incentive, I'll have this free action guide available to those that stick around for the entire webinar, and I'll give you links and how to access that towards the end. So let's get going. And again, I might be switching back and forth through slides, so I apologize if you see me working here and there. Let's start by asking a couple questions, and it's really going to lead into the topic of the webinar. What would it be worth to you as a business owner? And again, this webinar is designed for entrepreneurs and business owners like me, like you. What would it be worth to you if you knew you could be handed a list of your behaviors, your routines, really your habits, and if you got that list and you took it and you could eliminate all of them? You could eliminate all of the bad habits that are keeping you from success in your business. In fact, stealing money right out of your bank accounts. I think if you're like me, the answer would be absolutely. Show me that list. How do I get to it? Where is it? Talk to me about it. And I'm the same way. But what would it make you feel like if you knew that you could get that list and you could make the changes, and then as you saw those changes, you saw your business just open up. You saw your profits increase. You saw your productivity maximized. You saw all the little things that were holding you back just start to fall off. What would that feel like? I know for me, and when I've actually walked through this process, which by the way, I've done many times, and I will always continue to do, walking through the process of identifying bad habits and taking them apart, breaking them apart, replacing them with healthy success habits. What it would feel like is it would feel amazing, right? And that's a no-brainer. But really the reason why it's important for you to understand that is because as business owners, we get stuck in this routine. See, I truly believe there's routines within routines within routines within routines, habits within habits within habits. And we get in this broad routine, this broad habit of just we get into the office, we put our head down and we just go for it until the end of the day. We go home, we're exhausted. We get some sleep, hang out with the kids, maybe the wife, whatever we do, we wake up and we start it all over. And even that on a very broad scale, that's a habit, that's a routine. So imagine as a business owner, if you could change all that. Imagine if you felt like I can actually see hours added to my day. I could actually see my time opening up and my productivity increasing. I'm actually working smarter and more efficiently, more effectively, and not more. I'm actually working a little bit less, but I'm doing it more effectively. I love when that happens in my own business, and I love to see that in the businesses of people that I work with. So that's really part of what we're going to focus on here today. So I think the bottom line is, if you knew that that was a possibility to change, to eliminate bad habits, to change the way that you approach business, to feel the hours added to your day, to feel your productivity increase, to see your profits increase, you'd say, what's it worth? It's worth whatever it takes. I want to see that happen. Well, the great thing about it is this webinar is free. This is a free tool. It's a bundle of value that I'm giving you because this is a part of what I do. I love to help people. I've been helping people for a very long time. So let me take a quick detour. Let me tell you briefly about myself, and then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of how this webinar is going to help you. So as I said, My name's Brock Shinen. I'm a business and intellectual property attorney primarily, but I work with entrepreneurs, business owners, people in virtually all major industries I've worked with over the years. I've been doing this for more than a decade. And what I saw is that people coming to me with a legal problem, I would solve their legal problem, and then I would see these other sort of systemic issues. Maybe bad habits, maybe poor planning, maybe they had too many employees, and their budgets were just bursting at the seams. I would start to see these things, and at first I didn't say anything because I really didn't feel like it was my place. But over time, I realized I'm seeing all these successful businesses and successful business owners and entrepreneurs, and they're doing these things correctly. And I'm seeing these other ones that are not having the greatest amount of success. And I notice trends, and there's trends amongst the successful businesses. There's trends amongst the non-successful or unsuccessful businesses. So I started kind of creating notes and studying that and really looking into what does it take for businesses to be successful. And I studied that. I bought and read every book I could get my hands on. I was looking at research reports, psychological studies, everything I could grasp. The whole point is that I was amassing this information, and I was starting to infuse it into the way that I would practice, not just law, but the coaching and counseling aspect of what I do. And I started infusing that. And then a light bulb went off. I have to share this. I have to share what I know on a broader scale. Because what I'm learning, what I'm grasping, and even what I'm implementing in my very own business, I'm seeing explode. I'm seeing the effects just unreal. And I want to be able to share this with the world. So that's me in a nutshell. But really, this webinar is about you. It's about me delivering value to you. So let's get going with, what are you going to learn here? You know that the webinar title is the 3 little known habits that are ruining your business. And we are going to absolutely identify each of those 3. But let's step back one little pace and say, what do we need to learn in order to figure out what those habits are, and why are they little known? I'm going to talk about why they're little known also. We'll get through that. So first, we're going to learn what the 3 habits are. We're going to learn how to fix all 3 of them. And then on top of that, I'm going to teach you how to fix really any habit. And the crazy thing is, and there's studies out there, the research is there. I've read the research. There's plenty of research out there that you could change any habit. Now, most of us are here on this particular webinar because we're thinking, oh man, I need to get my social media in check, or I just check my email way too often, or I answer the phone way too often. And all those can be problems. Those may be habits that need to be broken. We're going to get into why they may not be bad, and I'll definitely talk about that. But there's a deeper issue going on here, is that you have to understand what habits really are. So before we get into habits, I was thinking a lot about, in preparation for this webinar, a lot of people, they struggle with getting information. I mean, when we see or we hear information that's kind of just blasted to us, we retain maybe 20 to 30%. And that number can go up in excess of 80% as we interact. And that's one of the reasons why when I do webinars and trainings, I love for people to engage. I love people to ask questions. I love it when they kind of engage in that process. Primarily because when you engage in the process, you actually retain so much more. Like I said, you can retain 80, 90, even 100% at times when you engage in the process and you make it interactive. So this particular setting can make it difficult sometimes to be fully interactive, but as much as you can, engage in the process. And that's part of why you'll see me on screen sometimes. You'll see slides where you're actually reading. Other times, I might pop in a poll, how long have you been in business, that sort of thing. And so you'll engage in that process. The whole idea is immerse yourself in this experience. But even if you do, there are times when people are just going to be like, man, that was a mess of information. I don't know how to translate it all. I don't know how to apply it to me. All of those kinds of things are very real problem for busy business owners, people that just have an overwhelming amount of tasks and information to process and things to do, and I get it. So I'm going to tell you one thing, and we'll just call it the one thing. if everything that we talked about in this webinar just kind of went in one ear and out the other, but there was one thing that you could hold on to, one thing that literally can change your life as a business owner, it is this. I believe for this webinar, now different contexts, I think there might be different things, but for this webinar, in this topic, the one thing is going to be called what is called, and it's commonly known as, the habit loop. Now, you might be thinking, well, hey, I took psychology in college, or I've read some articles. I know what the habit loop is. Wow, big deal. Here's the thing. You really don't know. Part of my background before I was an attorney, I was on my way to becoming a clinical psychologist. So psychology is definitely a very important area of study for me. To this day, I will read trade publications and studies and research and statistics, all that sort of thing around the idea of psychology. And the reason why I'm sharing it with you is because that one thing, the habit loop, first of all, if you've never heard of the habit loop, we will talk about it. We're going to dig into it and unpack it here today. Afterwards, you definitely want to do as much research as you can on that topic. You might hear it by different names, but the habit loop is pretty much the common way it's referred to. But here's the big secret for you, and that is, we're not just going to talk about the habit loop and defining what it is and what it does. We're also going to introduce some tricks in how you can use the habit loop in ways that psychologists are already aware of, and even executive coaches, and there's a certain elite group of people that are already employing these tactics to make the habit loop work for them, because there's sort of the generic basic, this is the definition, these are the pieces, these are how you influence change in your habits. But what you're not hearing, and it's not widely publicized because actually there's a huge market for it, is the secrets in the ways that you leverage the habit loop to your advantage. And so that's a lot of what we're going to talk about. So again, if you can walk away with one thing from this entire webinar, you forgot everything else. Do not forget the habit loop. It will literally change your life and change your business as a business owner. It will turn everything you thought you knew about habits, how to affect habits, how to change habits. It'll throw all of it upside down once you realize how clear you can see how habits form, how we trigger them, how they recur, all those types of things, and how we can make change. Because that's really why we're here, is to make change, right? So let's keep going forward. What I like to do anytime I'm working through any sort of teaching mode, educational mode, or topic is I like to start with the fundamentals, because I don't believe that it's possible for the majority of us to just learn by rote memorization, step 1, step 2, step 3. So I do like to introduce a lot of analogies, a lot of stories, because I think it makes it a little bit easier for you to grasp onto topics. But I also believe it's very critical to have some fundamental understandings. And in this particular webinar, we're talking about habits, right? So for you, it would be critical to first have a real solid understanding of what are habits, because we tend to think of, well, I know what a habit is. You know, outside of business, we think, well, I overeat or I speed on the freeway. Those are habits. And maybe if you've thought enough about habits, you start to realize, well, I'm in the business context, I'm in the habit of, if the phone rings, I pick it up, I answer it. I have to know who it is. Or if I need to check my email every 5 minutes because I'm in that habit of needing to stay on top. Or I check, I worked with business owners who literally check their bank accounts or their PayPal or whatever. They check it every half hour. They have to know what's going on. And see, all of those things are habits. But you may not have said, well, I understand how driving, getting in the car and speeding is a habit, or overeating or smoking or something like that, because society has kind of defined those behaviors as habits. But checking your email all the time or checking your bank accounts all the time as a business owner, those are very common behaviors. But why are they habits? In order to understand how you first even view habits, and then how you understand these little known habits that are ruining your business, you have to have a basic framework for what habits even are. So let's start with a basic fundamental framework. What are habits? Habits are going to be those practices, those routines that essentially allow our brain to shut off, to turn on autopilot. And so we don't have to think about them. They become so regular, so routine, these behaviors, that they just perpetuate themselves. And our brain literally, there's actually psychological studies that say our brains, they don't truly shut off. They never truly shut down. But our brains can kind of back off of focusing so much on getting something done and allow that autopilot to take over. Because of that, habits are extremely difficult to break because we're not thinking about them, right? That's the very essence, the very definition of habits, is that your brain allows you, these behaviors become so routine, your brain says, I don't need to think about it anymore. So let's take some easy ones. You get in your car. Some people park in the garage, some people park in the driveway, whatever it is. You get in, you put your seatbelt on, you turn on the key, you push the button, you start backing out, you're looking over your shoulders, you're checking the mirrors, all those things, and within a minute or two, you're out on the highway, right? Every single step in that process is a piece of a habit, or maybe what I would call a micro habit within a larger habit. Now, we don't tend to think of activities like getting into the car and getting on the highway as a habit, but when you think about from the definition standpoint, the reason why it's a habit is because our brain really doesn't have to think about it. I mean, do you really think every time you turn on your computer, okay, next I'm going to launch my email client. Next, I'm going to hit, check my email. Next, I'm going to look through all of the subjects or the from, who are the emails from, and I'm going to scroll through. Our brains don't really, at some point they stop saying, well, I'm going to look for every single name. And then after I see every name, I'm going to look at the subject. We don't really break down those types of activities because they become routines, and routines essentially become habits. So backing out of the driveway, getting on to the highway, a lot of people, as soon as they drive on the on-ramp onto the highway, they get immediately over into the fast lane. It's a habit. We don't think of it, it's just what they do. It all started somewhere, and that's the funny thing is all habits started somewhere. It started with some value, or it started with some decision that then perpetuated itself in, hey, this feels right. Next time, I'm going to do the same thing. And so eventually you do it every time. When I come to the office, I take the same way 99% of the time. But they're doing some construction not far from where I live. And so I had to adjust the roads I would take. And, it's funny, I've lived in the area for many years, and I'm completely familiar with the area where all the streets go. But you're sitting here probably laughing because you're thinking, yeah, when there's construction on your typical way to the office and you have to take a different road, it's not like you don't know where you are. It's not like you suddenly forget what city you're in or what state you're in and you're lost and you're pulling up GPS, where am I? But there's a piece of us that kind of becomes unglued, even if it's temporarily. It's like, wait a second, what do I do? Which way should I go? Which way should I turn? Now, it's instinctual still. And so I'm not saying you actually have a breakdown in the car. The point is that you get to this point where your brain has to kind of re-engage in the process. And when it re-engages, it says, okay, the typical routine, the typical habit was you would go left for 4 miles, turn right, turn left again, go straight, all that sort of thing. And when there's construction on the road, have to take different directions to the office. Your brain has to re-engage in the process. And as it does, that's actually, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but that's actually a great point of changing habits. It's a big secret, actually, that you're not seeing all the time. But if you really read the research on habits, one of the great ways, I'm going to give you actually a big secret. Let's take a quick side note right now. Psychology will tell you, excuse me, that a great time to break bad habits is while you're on vacation. And you're thinking, does this make sense? Maybe for some of you it does, maybe for some of you it doesn't, but let me explain why. When you are on vacation, you have interrupted the patterns of your life. You've interrupted the routines. You've changed the landscape. A lot of times geographically, sometimes you've even changed time zones, and so everything is kind of out of whack. When your life is out of whack, your brain has to fully engage in the process to get things done. When your brain is fully engaged in the process, it kind of pushes the habits to the side. And the brain is kind of communicating to you, you must look at each step and determine which is the correct step to move forward. So when the brain is engaged in that process, you're able to say, well, hey, if I've had this bad habit of, let's just pull one out, and I love this one because we're going to talk about it. It's not what you think. I check my email or I check my social media every 5 minutes. Let's just go for broke. Let's call that a bad habit. I don't think it is, but let's call it one. So you get into this and you're like, I'm on vacation. Now's my chance to break that habit. Why? Well, maybe because your family, your wife, your kids said, get off the phone, keep the phone off. You maybe even left the laptop at home, whatever it is. Your routine is interrupted. Your brain is engaged in this new activity, which is relaxation. And as business owners, a lot of us are not used to relaxation. Now is your chance to implement change. So I wanted to bring all that into focus because understanding habits and understanding the dynamics of habits, and most importantly, just understanding what a habit is critical to walking through these 3 little known habits that are ruining your business, but also all of the other habits that you can evaluate in your business and in your daily life that are affecting your profits, your time, and your productivity, primarily those 3 areas. Because as business owners, let's face it, those 3 areas are critical to us, right? So let's talk about what those 3 areas are. And for that, I'm going to pull back up a slide. Again, just trying to process through, making this a little bit easier for you to see and engage in the process. So we've talked about housekeeping. Just bear with me one moment. Actually, let's do a quick, how's this webinar going to help you? Because, I kind of glossed over that because I expect that everyone here understands that you're here to add hours to your day by changing bad habits. You're here to increase profits by eliminating bad habits. You're here to maximize your productivity by breaking the cycle of bad habits. And I did touch on each of those points, but let me reinforce it right now. This webinar is not just about you sitting back and hearing me talk about habits and talk about psychological studies. You are here to see change in your business. That's it. That's the bottom line. And that change needs to be positive, doesn't it? So having said that, look at how will this webinar help you? This is how it's going to help you. These are tangible ways it's going to help you. But let's move on. We've talked about what a habit is. It's a behavior that's on autopilot and it's hard to give up. We've talked about that. So let's go through what these 3 habits are, these little known habits that are ruining your business. And let's go back on screen real quick. So I'm going to lay out what these 3 bad habits are, these little known habits that are ruining your business. I'm going to walk through each of those. And I like there's definitely an approach out there. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. I think that's very helpful whenever you're communicating with people. So I'm going to do that actually and follow that process. So the first thing, what am I going to tell you? Those 3 little known habits. And hang on for this because I think you're going to be a little bit surprised because you're already drawing assumptions. Okay, the first habit we're going to talk about is that we tend to displace the value for longevity, or we trade the value for longevity with the value for urgency. The second one is that we tend to displace or trade the value for growth with the value for pleasure. Growth is painful, right? So a lot of times we displace or trade that value for the value that is just, it's a little bit easier, it's more pleasurable. And finally is that we get in the habit of displacing the value for foundations with the value for achievements. And I'd really like to unpack each of those because as you're sitting here hearing this and thinking about it, you're probably thinking, oh, come on, okay, longevity versus urgency. Okay, so putting out fires, I already know what that is. Actually, let's back up a step and let's look at what I just said. Displacing or trading the value of longevity for the value of urgency. So I didn't say replacing urgency or urgent issues with a long-term issues. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about values. And in each of these 3 little known habits, the reason why they're little known is because, see, I know a lot about psychology and certain areas, of course. I read a lot. I spend a lot of time investing in understanding this, and specifically as it relates to entrepreneurship, businesses, business success, personal growth and development, all of those areas. So I spend a lot of time looking at these issues and analyzing these issues and trying to pull out helpful information that I implement into my coaching, into my legal services, all of the things that I do, even the things that I write, the articles that I write. Talked about why the startup never ends. Quick detour. If you're on Medium at all, Medium is a online publishing platform. You could read some of the articles I've written. Why the startup never ends, and a lot of the focus is just on the psychology that's involved in launching a business. Anyways, back to this webinar. Values are critical pieces of habits, because when we find a habit, we identify a habit, and let's just call it a bad habit. If we trace back the steps, at some point along the line, there was a decision made that ultimately led to the habit. That decision, in part, was influenced by our value system. So an easy one is, actually, let's just start unpacking this, right? Let's not wait. So the first one we're going to talk about, the first one we're going to unpack is, actually, are we still, let me stop. We're good. Oh, we're there. Okay. So we tend to place or trade the value for longevity with the value for urgency. And what do I mean by that? Let me explain that in the context of a story. So I've worked with many business owners, entrepreneurs, artists, creators. And when I say artists, just for our purposes, artists, I include anybody from musicians, filmmakers, authors, actual painters, sculptors. I've worked with all of them. But in business, in the entrepreneurial side of things, really everybody that's creating something of value. It might be a service, it might be a product. My point is, in working with all these people, I've seen so many people respond to certain circumstances a certain way, but I'm going to illustrate this tendency to trade the value for urgency over the value for longevity with a quick story. So I work with a person who, let's just call him Joe. He had a business for a long time. Joe did. Let's say he was rendering services, and part of his methodology for marketing and all that sort of thing involves social media and heavy engagement in social media. And nowadays, I think we all kind of view, well, of course, every business has to have a social media component. And I don't disagree. That's another topic for another day. As it relates to habit, Joe decided at some point, I am going to respond to every single post. And his business was on Twitter, it was on Facebook, I think he even had a YouTube page, basically all over Instagram, using a lot of the tools that are out at the time and continue to be effective today. He was on all of them, and he made a decision. We are going to respond to every single comment, every single post or action that's taken with respect to our social media outlets. Now, his team felt like, hey, that's awesome, because we're engaging in the process. And so what happens is, at first, they get a few, but as their business grows, they're getting more and more comments, more and more feedback, and that looks great, right? So they're spending all this time responding to every single one. And then at some point, the scales start to tip. And what happens is they're spending much more time responding, because at first there's a growth curve and there's a high level of engagement. And as they engage in responding on social media, their customers, their clients are feeling like, wow, this company is they really care about what they're doing. And so Joe and his team are focusing on every single response, every single interaction on social media, and they're carrying out these conversations, and they're really adding value. And it's great, because it starts to create this growth curve, and you could see the contribution of that engagement with the increase in sales. And there's actually like this we talk about cause and effect, and we could even tie it looks like the cause, the effect of their engagement is increase in sales. So it looks great. But at some point, the scales start to tip. And what happens is, now they're spending more time on that social media engagement, and it's not translating to an increase in sales. In fact, they start to have a dip in sales. So I start working with Joe. There's a handful of issues that we're working on, and this one comes up, and we start talking through it. And what I pretty quickly realize is that somewhere along the line, he displaced the value for that long range goal, that long range, this is where we want to be, with the value for, but this is urgent, this is necessary right now. Now see, most of us tend to think of responding to social media, responding to emails, picking up the phone every single time it rings. We think of that as, oh, those are bad habits. Here's the thing. You need to be disabused of the notion. Get it in your head that idea is wrong. It's incorrect. It's not necessarily a bad habit to respond to every single social media post. It's not necessarily a bad habit to respond to every single email as it comes in, or to pick up the phone every time it calls. Really what matters is there's two pieces to this. One is, does doing that activity further the goals of your business? Because habits interplay with your business goals. So we're all, as business owners, we're all familiar with business plans, and maybe you had one for your business, maybe you didn't. Maybe it's a 1-page or a 100-page plan. Doesn't matter. We're all familiar with the idea that we plan long-range goals. We plan long-range where we want to be with our businesses. We want to be successful. We want to increase profits, all those types of things, right? That's all normal. What happens is that you start responding to every social media post. Initially, that is a customer engagement activity that directly results in an increase in sales. That fulfills a long-term goal. It also fulfills a short-term goal. And we form a habit that actually empowers and furthers the probability, or increases the probability, that we're going to reach that long-term goal. That's why habits are so powerful. They can actually guide whether we're going to reach our goals or whether we're not. So when you have a habit form that reinforces the activities that are necessary to become successful and reach your goal, whatever that goal is, they're good habits. So when Joe started, it was a great habit. He responded and engaged with his customers, resulting in increased sales, exactly what he was going after. But at some point, the value system changed. The value system changed because of what was happening, the volume of customer engagement. So Joe could have started to see, let's say, this is favorable and this is unfavorable. At some point, he sees the favorable scale, up high, sales are increasing, everything's looking great. And then the activities start to come more balanced. And at some point, Joe could have said, hey, you know what? We can't sacrifice our long-range goals. We can't sacrifice the ability to reach our goals by responding to the urgent. And he could have made a decision, just for the sake of conversation, he could have made a decision to say, you know what, we'll respond to every second comment or every third response or whatever. He could have come up with some framework to continue to engage the customers, but not on the same scale as he once did. Now, I think, somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk, if you're familiar with him, is a great example of somebody who claims to respond to every single social media post or engage in every single circumstance. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I know that I've heard that. For him, if that reinforces the achievement of his long-term goals, then it makes total sense. But if it started to steal the energy and it started to steal the ability to reach those goals, then the value system is shifted. And now you're starting to value a habit. You're starting to value or place value on something that forms habits that are counterproductive, that actually take away from your ability. So while we were thinking, oh, emailing all the time and calling people or answering the phone all the time is bad, or texting all the time, or checking social media is bad, none of those things are inherently bad. It's the value that you place on what you're trying to achieve that becomes the problem. So, little known habit, the first one that's ruining your business, is the point at which you have displaced the value for urgency, responding immediately because you've placed the value on the urgency, as opposed to, hey, as long as responding continues to get us focused on that long-range goal and continues to propel us forward towards that long-range goal, that's the value for longevity. That's okay. So urgency can actually feed in and support that you being propelled towards your goals. That's a great thing. That's not a bad thing. So when you form habits, this first little known habit we're talking about, you need to always make sure that your value for longevity is at the apex when it comes to, or weighs more than that value for urgency, because urgency is temporary. Urgency is, but they're on social media now, and there are circumstances where you must respond now or you lose opportunities. Because I work some in entertainment, I work with publicists and people like that, and there are times where an article comes out, and if you don't respond in the next 30 minutes, your opportunity truly is blown. So what happens is people need to respond now. It's urgent. But the best publicists in the world, and I've worked with some of the very best, you will see that they never sacrifice their long-range goals for an urgent matter. The urgency is always subservient to the long range. So that's a little known habit. First one that's ruining your business right now is that you are most likely valuing urgency more than you are valuing longevity. And because of that, you're making your long-term goals subject to your urgency habits, the habits that are formed out of urgency and out of urgent situations, those behaviors and routines that start to perpetuate themselves simply because of the urgency. Those start to trump the power over your long-term goals, and it steals your long-term goals. It undermines your long-term goals, and you cannot achieve long-term goals with that value system. So that's number one. Let's move on to number two. The second one is, and I have some slides, but I think we're fine in this respect. Do me a favor in the chat box, as you're walking through this, or even after if you're watching a replay, send me in a note if you feel that this would be more helpful going slide back to screen, the video feed with me, slide, if that would kind of place a greater imprint of the information on your mind. Let me know, and that would be very helpful. But the next little known habit that's ruining your business is trading the value for growth with the value of pleasure. And let me explain what I mean by that. And again, like the other one, I'll use kind of a story working with a client. So, and I'm making up names in these circumstances because of my work and the confidentiality involved in my work. I'm going to change a lot of the facts and circumstances, so you would not be able to trace this back to a particular client that I've worked with. I just, from an integrity standpoint, that's not how I operate. So I don't just change a name or change an industry. I try and change as much as possible when I tell a story, so you can't extrapolate who this might be. We talked about Joe, a man, in the last one. Let's talk about Nancy, a woman, in this one. Nancy has a business, successful. When Nancy started her business, let's say it's a service providing business, rendering some kind of design work. She said, we're just going to take everything that comes in and build this thing up, and then start creating value, and then start peeling away the ones that are lesser value and start adding the clients that are more valuable. So what happens is business is booming, business is growing, and there's 1,000 clients that are coming in the door, and there's $500 job here and a $2,000 job here, and it's great because there's just a constant high volume flow of money. And for a few years, Nancy's like, this is great. I'm on top of the world. There's a constant, as far as I can look, there's just a stream of business coming in, and it's awesome. It's amazing. It's everything I dreamed. But see, Nancy has dreams of getting big, growing her business, but more importantly, she has dreams of working a little bit less, not being in the office all day long, not having to handle customer service issues all the time, despite the fact that she has a customer service person on staff. So she's really working hard, and she's an excellent worker with a great work ethic, and she's really invested with how she's needed to, but she's formed the habit of watching this stream of fairly small jobs coming in, and it's a very high volume, so just a high volume of steady work. She's created the habit of that working for her. But underlying her habits is a value for growth, a value for this idea, this dream where she doesn't have to work so hard. Because as business owners, isn't that something all of us are looking for? It's not that we all love to work, right? I love to work. I love hard work. I love to get my hands dirty and get into the mix of things. I'm not somebody who likes to sit back and let it get handled by somebody else, or just get myself to a point and sit back. And I don't think you are either, right? As business owners, as entrepreneurs, what we love to do is get involved in the process and get our hands dirty and make things work. And we go to bed knowing we put in a good day, and we wake up the next day knowing we put in everything, and we're going to do the same thing today. But we also have dreams. And Nancy in her business had dreams of working a little bit less, spending a little bit more time with the family, and she had some hobbies that she wanted to spend some time investing in. So Again, we started working together. There were a variety of issues that came into play, and this is one of the issues that emerged that we ended up talking through. And so, in the course of the conversation, Nancy, you take every job that walks in the door, don't you? Well, yes, that's the best thing, but is that what you want? Well, no, I'd really like to shift from, like a $500 job to a $5,000 job to a $50,000 job. I'd like to make that transition. Well, what's keeping you from doing that, Nancy? Well, I feel like if I let go of the small jobs in order to create space for the big jobs, I'm going to lose the small jobs, and that stream is going to start to slow a little bit. And who knows if I'm going to get those big jobs? Who knows if they're going to be lining up? And see, that's what it takes to grow. So what happens is the habit that has formed is the habit of pleasure. It's the habit of, as long as I know work is coming in and there's a steady flow of customers, a steady flow of cash, I'm not going to stretch myself. And what happens is there could be a value for growth, which is painful many times, but we tend to displace it or trade that value for pleasure because it's easier, right? Pleasure feels good. We feel good when we know money's coming in, work's coming in, we don't have anything to worry. But when we sacrifice the value for pleasure, we sacrifice the value for growth with the value of pleasure, it keeps us from our dreams. And this is why it's a little known habit that's ruining your business. Because what you don't realize, what we all don't realize, is that what we start to do is, because we value that pleasure, we form habits that reinforce the pleasure. And because those habits become a part of our routine and they're very difficult to break, we don't leave space to create new habits that result in growth. Because those habits require not only a change in our behavior, but a change in the reward that comes from that behavior. The reward temporarily, many times, and when I say temporary, this could be a day, a month, a year, 10 years. It might take you 10 years to grow to where you want. And it may be painful all along the way. But as long as you're empowering the habit of pleasure instead of the value for growth, you will continue to perpetuate the habits that give you pleasure, which are the easy ones. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a business that is high volume, low value transactions. I mean, that's, you could think about it, businesses like PayPal. I mean, that is what, billions of dollars we're talking about, because it's a high volume, very low transaction value, but there's such a high volume that it results in so much money. And you could take apart small businesses all over the country, and there's millions, tens of millions of small businesses. And you could say, well, these ones focus on low volume, high value clients, or low volume, high value products, like a $10,000 computer as opposed to a $400 computer. There's a different value system involved in there, but you're not going to sell as many $10,000 computers as you are the $400 ones. So you tend to have a higher volume when it's low value, and you tend to have a lower volume when it's higher value. That's just the name of the economics, right? That's the way economics work. But the thing with business owners is that so many of us, we want to add hours to our day. We want to work harder, smarter, not harder. We want to work more efficiently, not just more. We want to free up time. We want to increase our profits and grow. All of those things are risky, and all of those things can be painful. So when we reinforce the habits that keep us feeling good, we fail to grow. So what's the second habit that's little known, that's really ruining our businesses, is that we have traded the habits that reinforce pleasure for, instead of reinforcing the habits that lead us to growth. And those are painful, but they're critical. So that's the second one. Let's move to the third one. So and this one's great. I just recently started reading a book, and it was talking about John Wooden, the famous UCLA basketball coach. I'm going to talk about him in a second. But this third little known habit is that we value achievements. We form habits that value achievements over valuing foundations. So John Wooden, this famous, people know him all over the world in so many more ways than just being a successful coach, but really even just as a person that contributed to society of how to achieve success. And one of the things he would say is that he cared much more about the process his athletes would take than their particular achievement. So yes, it was great if they won championships. Of course, he wanted that as a coach, but he cared more about the process that it took to get there, because he knew that you can always win a game. There's so many circumstances. Some of them are even chance. But if you focus on the process, it increases the probability that winning becomes a habit, because the processes involved leading to winning were habits. And we're going to get into in a second micro habits versus macro or larger habits. But first, just hearing that, you could see the value in the process. And I want to talk about in this third little known habit, I want to talk about a company I worked with that placed an extremely high value on their legacy, on why they were created. And so they would have weekly team meetings, and management would come in with their reports, their financial reports, their budget reports, all sales reports, all that sort of stuff would happen on a weekly basis. And they'd all sit around and analyze that. But another thing would happen, and it was fairly unique, I think. And it was management would basically take turns communicating and recommunicating the value system that was built into the company, why it was formed. Now, we could look at companies like Nordstrom or like Zappos and say, everybody knows them to be well known for customer service. They're at the top of the game when it comes to customer service. But I'm guessing, now I've never worked with Nordstrom or Zappos, but I'm guessing that underneath that is a value system for foundations, a value system for businesses. Successful businesses are actually built on top of foundational blocks. Some of those are customer service in the broadest sense. Some of those are sales techniques. Some of those are just superior products. Some of those are superior services. But if we look at sort of there's the ground level, and then there's these huge foundational blocks. Those foundational blocks are actually what the rest of your business success sits on top of. So if you fail to have the foundations built, when you have success, imagine a bar of gold that weighs 50 pounds on top of a toothpick. It just crushes it. But if a bar of gold 50 pounds is on top of a cement block that's on top of another cement block that's even larger, and it basically forms sort of a platform of foundations, that gold block is just going to sit there. There's no impact under it, and it's certainly not going to crumble off or fall through or break through, anything like that. Foundations are one of the key areas just in success in general, in sports, in business, in marriage, in relationships, in life. Foundations are critical to success. In the business context, the third little known habit that's ruining your business is that we have started to place, or we've been placing, the value more on achievements. This many Facebook friends, this much access to the article that we posted or the video that we posted. I mean, we hear it in the media every day, all day long. This person had 1 million views. This person had, 500 million people do this or that, or they bought this many products. It's all about achievements. And achievements are great, but achievements don't sustain a business. Now, over time, a habit of achieving a certain status, of course, because then it becomes a habit. It becomes routine. But that's like what Coach Wooden said. It's a part of the process. Those habits that form here lead to foundations that you can build on that eventually lead to ongoing success. So in our circumstance, for this third little known habit that's ruining the business, when we place more value on achievements, we sacrifice building foundations that can support achievements over the long haul. And this is a critical area where I see personally so many businesses, particularly in this day and age. Now, 10, 11, 12 years ago, honestly, there was a pretty different perspective that I would have in clients that I was working with, where the tools available now, online tools, apps, things like that, they just weren't at the level they are now. So you would see businesses investing deeply. They would go very deep into a field of study like marketing or like customer service. They were going much deeper in building stronger foundations, because really they didn't have a whole lot of other choices to do. But now we have apps. There's an app for that. There's a tool for that. And pretty much everything from customer service. We can automate customer service. We can automate marketing. I mean, I get emails all the time. I see websites and I see landing pages and all this kind of stuff. Automate this, automate that, automate this. And it's great from a factory mentality, because we know from the factory mentality, going back to Henry Ford, when you can automate a process, you reduce your overall investment in the process, and you can increase your profits and maximize your productivity because you've streamlined. And so that's kind of built into our culture to automate things, because the idea is as we automate, we reduce the financial and time investment and increase productivity and profits, simply because you have to do less. There's less involved in the process. But what happens is, as business owners in particular, and small business owners or solopreneurs, people that are managing their own businesses, they get killed by this. Their business gets destroyed by this, because what happens is they're trying to automate everything. They're trying to do everything because there's a tool for this, a tool for that, a tool for this, a tool for that. And they have 20 tools and they know nothing below the surface. And if customer service, you see this little cap on the top of the water and you say, well, I got an app for that. It's automated, don't worry. Underneath that could be an iceberg. So when there's a problem like with Nordstrom or Zappos, that iceberg is really what starts to rise to meet the challenge, because they've placed a value on developing the foundation so that that little cap on the top of the water is not going to get pushed under after the first horrible customer service experience, right? So just a recap on this one, when we place a higher value on habits that reinforce achievements over habits that reinforce foundations, what we do is we actually cripple our ability to achieve in the long term. So yes, we might have successes. We might have a win. We might have a video that just gets 10 million YouTube views and it's awesome and there's money made and all that kind of stuff. But you can't sustain those types of achievements when there's no foundation for it. And that's part of what even marketers are capitalizing on. Hey, we've broken this down. We've cracked the code. We figured out how you automate it. And they've said, we've actually find a way to value the foundation by automating the foundation. You know, a few years back, there were actual trainings on how to make something go viral, which is just crazy just even to think about, because of all the dynamics of anything going viral to begin with. But marketers are great at this, because they look at it and they say, well, we can understand the dynamics that made this video go viral. We'll create a blueprint, and then we'll automate that and we'll sell it. 100 different, 1,000 different, 10 billion different people buy that blueprint, and they just plug and play. The thing is they may be building a foundation for their business, those marketers, but you as a business owner bringing that blueprint into your business, learn absolutely nothing. You build no foundation whatsoever. So what you end up doing is reinforcing the habits that just focus on achievements and do not focus on foundations. And so you can't build foundations for future achievements. And that's what happens. It just turns the whole thing upside down. So I've laid out the 3 habits, the little known habits that are ruining your business. The displacement of value for, sorry, just let me run back through these. For urgency over longevity. So we reinforce the habits that form around urgent matters instead of the ones that form around making sure that we're in business 10, 20, 30 years from now. The other one is that we value habits that reinforce pleasure or the ease of things over the habits and the values that reinforce those habits that are around growth, and it's often painful. And the final one is that we tend to reinforce the values that support achievements instead of the values that reinforce habits for foundations. And on foundations, you can build achievements that won't crumble over time. So those are the 3 ones that are killing your business right now. If you walked away from this webinar right now and said, okay, I got it. I got some stuff to work on, that would be great for you as a business owner. And I love doing this. I love working with business owners and saying, here are the tools, here's the value, do something with it. But I want to give you a couple more things of value to help you implement this stuff. So I did mention at the outset, I'm going to give you what I'd call the one thing. It's the one thing. If you forgot everything else, and I know that in terms of learning, we tend to remember the last thing that we learn. Let me talk to you about the habit loop. The habit loop, psychologists have kind of defined as this loop that happens when, and it starts with a trigger. A trigger or some sort of event happens, and then we have a response which creates a routine to that. But let's start with a response. So there's a trigger, my phone rings. A response, I answer it. And a reward, I know who it is and what they want. So that's the beginning of the loop. And then because of that reward, my brain now says, well, if I do this every time, I'll always know who's calling and what they want. So the next time the phone rings, that's the trigger. The routine now, the habit that's formed is I pick it up, and the reward is now I know who's on it and what they want. So that's the circle. That's the habit loop. Very easy to define. Now, psychologists and business experts a lot of times tend to focus on, well, you can't change the triggers and you don't necessarily change the rewards. So you got to focus on the routines. You got to focus on the response. And that's why vacations can be great, because you disrupt the routines and you could implement new behaviors. So, you know, on one end of the spectrum, you take things like overeating or smoking, you know, more health related, and we say, what's the trigger? You wake up in the morning, maybe the very first thing you do is grab a candy bar or drink a Coke. I mean, I've worked with business owners that's literally the first thing they do. They roll out of bed, they grab their phone to check their email, and they grab a Coke out of the refrigerator. That's the beginnings of their habit. What's the routine? I just said it. The trigger is waking up. The reward is that caffeine boost, and now I know what's ahead of me for the day. Once they've checked their email, they know what's ahead of themselves for the day. So what a lot of psychology and business experts say is start working on the routine. Why don't we replace that routine with something that still fulfills the reward? You can still get a caffeine boost, you can still know what's going on, but you don't do it that way. Now, drinking a Coke, I think there's obvious drawbacks to doing that. Checking your email, I think there's arguments on both sides. The point is not the particular behavior and whether it's bad or good. Drinking a Coke, there's studies out there. Smoking, overeating, driving at excessive speeds, all those things, I think there's enough documented studies out there that show these are probably not good for you. But in the business context, it's a little bit harder. It's a little bit more difficult, because so much of what's out there is these are bad behaviors. And it's simply not true. And even when you dig into the research, you know, we talk about causation and effect, you know, causation versus correlation. In science, you'll learn causation versus correlation. What's the difference? Just because you have busy work, like checking your email, answering your phone, doesn't mean that it causes you to fall behind. So that just because there's a correlation in the behaviors, I'm behind and I've been checking my email all day, it must be because I'm checking my email, cause, effect. Instead, we can look at it as, well, there's a correlation for certain. I'm behind and I've been checking my emails all day, but is it really the cause? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But that's a different issue. What are bad behaviors? That's for a different discussion with a lot more investment in the specifics of what those behaviors are and why you're doing them. With the habit loop is, we want to look at, and what psychologists will tell you is you want to replace the routines with something that achieves the same reward. So if you need caffeine, the obvious, well, then drink coffee. Well, there's actually a better one. Drink tea. Actually, there's a better one. A lot of people meditate or do yoga in the mornings, or they go for a run, they exercise. And you know why? Not because it gives you a caffeine boost, it gives you an adrenaline boost. And guess what? That adrenaline boost can actually replace the caffeine boost or the nicotine boost that you thought you needed. So in other words, replacing the routine, going from you know, Coke or coffee to running or yoga, might actually achieve a reward that feels the same. So you can actually break habits. Now this is an amazing breakthrough. This has been around for a while, this information, but it's an amazing breakthrough for business owners, this information, because you can realize I can start to actually implement different behaviors, different routines that will still make me feel like I've got the reward that's a part of that habit loop. So when a trigger happens, instead of reaching for the Coke, I go reach for my running shoes. Or instead of, you know, the phone rings, let's just say we've determined that I need to know how my day's going to look. And the routine is right now picking up the phone the second it rings, and then answering or looking at my email every 5 minutes. Let's say that I propose a new routine where the night before, at the end of the day yesterday, I write out my schedule for the next day. And that becomes how I know what's going to happen for the day. So I can now, when the trigger happens, I get into the office. If my normal routine, I check my email, I check my voicemails and all that sort of thing, but it already pushes me back, because then I start responding to emails, and that takes an hour, and then I start returning some calls, and that takes another 2 hours. So now I'm 3 hours behind doing anything that I actually intended to do. Let's just say that I instead bring a sheet, or on my calendar, my iPad, whatever, that says, here's what you're supposed to do today. And I don't even power up my computer. Try that routine. You replace what you were doing and see if you get the same result. Now, that's the typical approach in the habit loop of altering habits, breaking behaviors. But I propose, and this is based on things that I've read, this is also based on just trends that I've seen with successful businesses and business owners and entrepreneurs, is that as you look at your value system, I mean, let's take an easy example. If you value integrity, and you own a business with a partner, and one of your responsibilities is the books, so you're handling all the money, the financial transactions. If you value integrity and honesty, you're not going to start skimming off money off the top, right? So you will be in the habit, as you do those books, of doing them honestly and accurately. If you do not value honesty or integrity, you might start to steal. But there's another value that starts to come into play. Do you value making money more than you value honesty and integrity? Because now you have competing values. And remember the 3 little known habits that are ruining your business, we talked about those all in the context of values, because values influence the behaviors that lead to habits. And that's why values are critical. So if you say, well, I value honesty and integrity, of course, and so I don't steal. But what we don't know is that you actually value making money more than you value integrity and honesty, and so you start to skim a little bit off the top. And now you've formed a habit of dishonesty because of the value of making money trumping or becoming more important than the value of integrity and honesty. And that's my point with the habit loop. There's a little hack right there, a way to add more power and more sort of effectiveness to the habit loop is by adjusting your values and reinforcing your values. And how do you do that? Look, that's another topic for another day, but I want you thinking about, what are my values that influence my behaviors? Because habits are based on behaviors. You had to make a choice in the first place to start a habit. If you can go back, what led you to that decision? You'll see values under there. Now, that's not a complete picture, of course, because there are a lot of circumstances that go into why we choose behaviors that turn into habits. But values is a big piece of what leads us to make choices that eventually become habits. So that's the habit loop. If you can walk away with one thing, understanding that concept, you can change any habit in your life, in your business, in your relationships, in any area of your life, if you understand the habit loop and how to make an impact and changes on that process, changing out behaviors and routines, swapping them with other ones that accomplish the same reward, looking at our values and then changing our value system. And sometimes it's just looking at the reward. We can swap rewards and they give the same sort of feeling, even though they're not identical. So a caffeine high can be replaced with an adrenaline high that comes from running. So you can actually replace unhealthy habits in life and in business with because of the rewards that you're after that fulfill the same value system. They just do it through a healthy means. So that's the habit loop. That's kind of your one thing takeaway, but I really want to reinforce, I'm going to stack these up for you. You have 3 habits that are ruining your business right now. The habit to displace the value for longevity with the value for urgency. The second one is displacing the value of growth, which is painful, with the value of pleasure. The third one is displacing the value for foundations with the value of achievements. And then we talk about the habit loop and how we actually affect change within that habit system, and we reformulate our habits into healthy habits. So what I want to do right now is do a little bit of Q&A. I know you've been with me for a long time, and I really appreciate it. I hope that I packed this thing with value for you. I really do. I hope that I gave you great information and tools that aren't just like, wow, that was a lot of great information, but actual ways to implement this to become successful, because you can literally turn your business around overnight. It depends on you and how you work with this stuff, but you could potentially turn your business around overnight if you start to change your values and you start to change these 3 habits in particular. And you do that through understanding the habit loop and how we affect change in our habits. So we're going to do a quick Q&A, but before we do that, I promised you that for those of you who stuck around, I wanted to give you access to a free action guide. Now what this is it's my 5-step productivity action guide. Because habits are one thing. I mean, we know as business owners, there's so many different facets of being a business owner. There's so many different ways that we engage with our businesses, and habits is one area. You know, we could say, well, there's this sort of broader umbrella, personal development, and we can look at habits, we can look at productivity, we can look at efficiency and all these different things. So we've just gone through habits. The productivity guide is a different animal. It's a different topic within that larger umbrella of personal development as a business owner. So the productivity guide, what it is basically like an ebook that gives you, kind of walks you through step by step, how do you become more productive? What are the steps to doing that? And I've broken it down for you really easy. 5 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and actually the 5th one, there's subparts you can kind of walk through. What I've also done is I've said, here are some of the reasons, step by step, of why you may not be productive. And you could actually look at some of the things that may be keeping you from being productive. So the ebook kind of walks you through, this action guide walks you through those steps, explains, tells you some stories around the topic. And then there's some workbook type, questionnaires and question and answer type of thing to get you engaged in the process. Because you'll recall when we started this webinar, you know, if you're just reading or you're just listening, you may maybe get 20, 30%. As soon as you engage in the process, you're lifting that number, that retention number, to potentially 80, 90, 100%. So take the action guide, implement it by immersing yourself in the process. And there's some, like I said, some workbook type stuff, but you can make copies of that for yourself and do it, you know, for productivity for one vertical of what you do, another vertical of what you do. You can do it 1 month and then redo it the next month. I truly believe that when you reevaluate your habits, your productivity, all that type of stuff, when you reevaluate it, you learn things as you go along. You change things as you go along. Your values change over time. So I want to give that to you. Here's how you get it. I'm going to pull up actually a click screen. And where's that at? So let me get you to this screen real quick. Talked about the habit loop. Okay, so the 5-step productivity action guide, you could find it at brockshinen.com/5-step guide. And that's the number 5-step guide, all one word, 5-step guide. Type that in. It's going to ask you for your email address, and this is just part of the process of verifying, you know, that you were at the webinar and you're going to get this book. But it's not going to increase the number of emails you're getting. We keep all the emails. We don't sell the list or anything like that. But download this thing. I'm going to go back to the screen. So brockshinen.com 5-step guide. And here. So download the guide. Go there. Read through that. And the other thing too is you're going to see mentioned towards the end of that guide, I also have a video training product. I'm not going to talk about it here in this webinar, but you can read about it. And there's a page that you can go to on the site that also tells you about that video training. I am all about helping business owners become more successful. And I want to give you as much value and as many resources as possible to help you do that. So that's why I wanted to focus on habits. I want to give you a free tool on productivity. I also have this basically secret tricks that all these successful entrepreneurs are using that you're not even aware of, you haven't even articulated. That's the video training. So download the or access the productivity action guide, and you'll see it talked about and referenced there. If you need help with anything, we offer a multitude of services. BrockShinen.com, you can look at coaching. So BrockShinen.com/coaching /coaching. Start with the action guide. That's what I promised you. I don't want to do any selling on this. I know a lot of people are trying to sell products and services. I just want to deliver some value to you. So go download the 5-step productivity action guide, BrockShinen.com /5-step guide. Download that. And then as far as Q&A, anything that comes up, you can use the chat box right now, or you can email me afterwards at makeithappen@brockshinen.com. I think on the replay, you can actually submit questions after the fact, and they'll come to me, and I'll try my best to respond to any of those. But what I really want to do is thank you so much for spending this time with me. I appreciate all of the time and the investment that you've made in showing up. I hope that I've delivered more value than you expected. I hope I've given you tools that you didn't quite anticipate. I hope that this has been a really meaningful time for you. And if there's any way that I can serve you or my team can help serve you, please reach out to us. Like I said, make it happen at brockshinen.com. Thank you so much, and we will see you later.